Cross live now and speak to Shirley Yu, who is from the Harvard Kennedy School at the University of Harvard. And Shirley, first of all, before we move on, talk to me about the death of the former leader. How significant do you think that will be in terms of impact on what's happening right now, if at all?
Hi, Marianne. The death of a former national leader, particularly one who is largely considered to be a political antithesis to the current Chinese leader, Xi Jinping, is by all means precarious. Jiang embraced the private sector, private entrepreneurs. He admired the Western economies and technology, and he often recited the Lincoln's Gettysburg Address in English. Xi is enamored with the state sector, economic self-reliance. He's considered an orthodox Marxist-Leninist, and so they are antitheses of each other. Jiang's fan base are not necessarily in full alignment with Xi's policies currently. And don't forget the direct trigger of the June 4th student protest in 1989. Was the death of a former Chinese leader, Hu Yaobang. So commemoration of Jiang at a time when there is already a wide presence of anti-zero COVID protests can lead to further escalation of possible dissent in all areas.
And how different do you think these protests are that we're seeing compared to ones that we've seen before?
The demands, the symbolism, and the organization are all quite unique in this wave of protests. The demands are no longer event-specific, and that is to end the zero-COVID policy. Some have clearly chanted political demands, democracy, rule of law, freedom of speech, and including challenging the legitimacy of the Chinese Communist Party and its leader. The wave of protests also has no clear organizers and organization mechanisms, which is very different from the Hong Kong protest we saw in 2019. It is completely spontaneous, decentralized, and it broke through the most pervasive Chinese censorship and mass surveillance. And also, lastly, let's look at the protest symbolism. White paper revolution, protesters raise a piece of blank paper, a symbol of tacit defiance. And when we see thousands and thousands of blank sheets of paper like this, it is a very powerful form of freedom of expression in a country where freedom of speech is not celebrated.
And how is the government differentiating between people who are protesting politics and government and those who are protesting the COVID lockdowns?
It is rather interesting. The government sees this as a dual crisis, a public health crisis and a political one, and it's addressing them with a bifurcated approach. So on the public health front, we saw zero COVID policies have been loosened across the board in many major cities in Guangzhou, Beijing, Zhengzhou, etc. The government is or has shifted focus from that mass containment mentality into two new areas, the vaccination of senior citizens and the construction of massive makeshift hospitals, some facilities where large gatherings are expected, say, for example, manufacturing facilities and universities, etc. But on the political front, as the zero COVID control tapers, the government can now differentiate the people who are angry with the zero COVID policy versus the ones who are just simply angry with the political architecture. And I think there may be a heavy clampdown on the political dissenters.
Shirley Yu, thank you very much indeed.